Teresa, I have been meaning to reach out to you for a while to discuss strength training. And it was so funny because I sent you a message a little while ago saying, hey, I would like to talk about strength training through the life cycle, talk about people when they're pregnant and postpartum, even before that. And then as we age, and I sent you some ideas and you said, oh my gosh, yes, this is my jam. And I kind of chuckled to myself because I'm like, I know that's why I'm reaching out to you.
Great.
Yeah, it was like you thought I picked your name out of a hat and just like, oh, I think I'll talk to her about this. But no, I know that you center a lot of your practice and you have such amazing messages around the benefits of strength training. And so thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Mel. And I was so excited for you to reach out because this is my jam. I love strength training. I love thinking about how, as clinicians, we can incorporate strength training across the lifespan. Everything from our kiddos to, throughout our teen years, that perinatal period when we might be going through pregnancies and having babies, all the way through to peri and postmenopausal. It's so important for us to be able to incorporate this in meaningful ways that are sustainable and achievable for people.
Yeah. And I think I always want to, I'm going to get you to tell us a little bit about yourself. But before we get to that, I think to set the stage, this is something that I find that no matter what someone's coming in for, whether it be an ache or pain or nervousness about certain movements or just recovery after having a baby, I think something that's always coming out of my mouth is let's just address your whole body strength, or let's just make sure you're strong enough to do the things that you want to do. And so I think this will be a really helpful episode just so that it kind of makes sense to people, because I think sometimes they come in like, what are you talking about? I told you my back hurts. Like, why are we strengthening? Don't you need to figure out what's going on with my back? And so before we get into that, will you please share a little bit about yourself so that anyone who doesn't know you can understand who Teresa Waser is?
Absolutely. So I am both an orthopedic and pelvic health physiotherapist. I own my own clinic, RX Physiotherapy, which is based in Leduc, Alberta, Canada. Outside of my clinical duties and, kind of running the clinic, I also have the great pleasure and privilege of doing some teaching. I started off my teaching career as a teaching assistant with Anthony Lowe, and moved up to being a senior teaching assistant. I assist him on both his female athlete level 1, 2, and master class. And then in recent years, I've started teaching my own courses as well. Ant and I, we have one course that we teach together, which is reframing resistance training across the lifespan, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And then I also have some courses with Pelvic Health Solutions and with Reframe Rehab. And I developed a framework called TIPS FC, which is really meant to help simplify, give clinicians a framework and fitness professionals as well for how we can approach tackling pain, pelvic health symptoms, and performance aspects in our athletes in a really whole person way, where we're looking at all the different factors that can affect these experiences that our clients are having.
Awesome. I wonder, I want to leave this up to you actually. Do you want to start off with that? Do you want to start off with explaining like what TIPS FC is, and then we talk about how this relates to different client populations? Because I do want to touch on things that we would be thinking about, or maybe that some of these populations are coming in with. So I wonder, do you feel like there's a natural place you want to start?
Sure. I mean, TIPS FC, I've got like a full 2-day course on
I
this.
know,
It's hard to
I know.
condense it down just into, a little brief snippet here. But basically, we understand that a biopsychosocial approach is needed. So we need to be considering, yes, that there are issues in the tissues that are relevant for someone's experience within their body. But then there are also many other factors that play into something. So if we take something like, say, skipping as an example, so, maybe some of the people listening might have that experience themselves, or work with people who have the experience of leaking, or maybe they have some prolapse symptoms, some heaviness in their pelvis when they're trying to do some skipping. There are many different factors that can influence whether someone experiences leaking with skipping. And those are all factors that we can potentially have an effect on and change in order to make that person's body and nervous system better manage the demands of skipping, so that they leak less or potentially not even leak at all. So the how of movement matters, and how the nervous system and the body is meeting the demands of that task. So things like the tension that we are generating within our whole body, within the pelvic floor locally, if we have any impact in the movement. So skipping obviously is an impact movement, so we can vary the amount of impact and how that impact is being attenuated within the body. We can also look at irritability. So that could be gut irritability. Gut health has a big role to play, and we're just discovering and learning more about the influences of gut health on our symptom presentation. Bladder irritability, and then also just irritability within the musculoskeletal system. So beyond tension, impact irritability, posture and position can also play a role in symptom presentation, and not from the standpoint that there is one optimal or right way to be from our posture, but understanding that how we are setting our bodies up for a particular movement or task will influence pressure, tension, and potentially symptoms. And so we can take a look at that and potentially change those things to help. And pressure is the next one. So pressure really refers to intra-abdominal pressure. It's something that I think we often turn into the villain when we have symptoms, but understanding that pressure is actually a helpful and necessary thing. And it's more about not just trying to minimize pressure, but more matching how our body is managing that pressure. And beyond that, sensitivity within our nervous system, so both peripherally and centrally. And this is where things like sleep and stress and self-compassion and many, many other different parameters can feed into what's going on within our bodies and how we're feeling. Our strategy, so how we're going to do something, so technique tweaks, things like that. Because biomechanics do matter. Physics is a real thing. So we need to be paying attention to that. And finally, considering fatigue. So fatigue is kind of operating right now in real time. So how well fueled are we? How we've been sleeping? What other mechanical loading and demands have been placed on us throughout the day to where we are right now? What's kind of in our gas tank? And that can make a difference in terms of what symptom presentation or performance might be like. And then considering on the longer term, what is our capacity? And I think that this is capacity is really, for me, one of the main segues into why strength training is so important for us across our lifespan, because our capacity, like our body's innate strength, will impact the amount of tension, the amount of pressure, the ease with which we can do these things. And thinking about it also from that psychosocial standpoint, if you are stronger, if this impacts how we feel about our bodies, what we believe we can do, how much fear we might have when it comes to having to do something, how much of a badass we can show up in life. All of that is influenced by our innate strength and capacity as well.
And it's funny, as you talk, I think about, like, again, if we start with kind of the postpartum client that's listening, or that maybe, someone, they come in quite often. If they're coming to see a pelvic health physio, it's related to, I don't know what exercises I should do, or I'm having some leaking, or I can't control my poo, or I'm having some pressure or heaviness. And obviously they think about us, and they think about their pelvic floor. But then, as you start to really probe, I'm nervous to carry my baby too much. My neck is sore from feeding. My back hurts. And so, as you mentioned, we look at the whole person and think all of these things you've mentioned: their sleep, their nutrition, how are they healing? But they're doing a lot of things very repetitively. And although I'm going to talk to them about their pelvic floor, I'm also thinking of this person that is sitting here telling me all these heavy things they need to do. And
Mhm.
sometimes, whether we get to this in the first session or in a subsequent session, but just kind of bringing up the topic around your whole body's deconditioned and weak too. And maybe it's your pelvic floor that's telling you about it, but this isn't just the pelvic floor. This is not just a pelvic floor issue. This is a whole body issue. So let's talk a little bit about this postpartum woman, because I think there's a lot of fear around movement and exercise. And but their demands are high, right? Their
Mhm.
demands are very high.
Yeah, definitely. I think what comes to mind as you're talking, Mel, is a few different things. So one is pain is a different element than weakness. And I do think that that's an important clarification to make at the outset here. We can be incredibly strong humans and have pain, and we can be incredibly weak humans relative to other people and have no pain. I do think we always, at the outset of this conversation, need to take note that the answer is not, oh, you have pain. Well, that must mean that you're weak, or the answer to that is get stronger. That is not the message here.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we do need to, again, think about that whole biopsychosocial approach and realize that capacity, what our strength is like, is important, and it does influence the choices that our nervous system can make. So just to give an easy example for that, say I live in a body where picking up something that is 100 pounds is very easy for me. I can, have a conversation as I'm repetitively picking up this 100-pound weight. The amount of tension and the amount of intra-abdominal pressure that I need to generate within my body to lift this weight up is minimal. I have no fear associated with lifting this up. I feel good about doing it. It makes me happy. I potentially have a community around me that's providing social connection. So imagine that person, and now compare that to someone who that same 100-pound weight now represents for them like their one repetition max. This is the maximum amount of weight that they have that current capacity to be able to lift. Now we're in a very different situation, even though the task is the same, aren't we? So now we have someone where the amount of tension, the amount of intra-abdominal pressure that they need to generate to lift this same weight is way higher. We may have some fear associated with this, right? And how is that fear potentially going to associate, or how is that going to potentially influence the choices that the nervous system makes? So maybe we're really gripping and overcooking our tension within the pelvic floor, as an example. Maybe we're really concerned about, are we lifting this in the right way? And maybe we're super hypervigilant. Maybe we are, really driving a lot of tension in our lower back because we've heard this message, like, when you lift, make sure that you don't round your lower back or else. And maybe we're actually overcooking our tension there. And that's making that weight actually feel heavier to lift than what it necessarily could feel like. And if we're someone who's living in a body that has symptoms with lifting, those are also things that potentially could be driving our symptoms up.
Mm-hmm. So if I picture, I think sometimes people are looking for recipes, like which exercises am I supposed to do after I have a baby? I think there's a lot of messaging around there. This is good, this is bad. And I'm curious to know if we talk through maybe how we clinically look at this. If someone comes in to see me, maybe that's curious about exercise postpartum, I always start with just, what do you want to do?
Yes.
What are you interested in? Because they'll say very different things. Some people are like, I can't wait to get back to my online Pilates classes. Other
Mhm.
people like, just want to hike with my dogs. And so I think first just finding out what's meaningful for someone. But then I quite often ask, like, well, are you doing it? And if you're not, why?
Yes.
Is it because your body's telling you no? Your head is telling you no, like messages are telling you no? Or, tell me a little bit about that. And I think you gain a lot of information from that, because I think that's where you start where you were just talking there. Um, if if that person is, their body's telling them no, well, then what is it? Yeah. Like you said, what are you doing? Is it something you're overcooking, as you say, or what are you, I always often say, like, what are you thinking about? Tell me what you think about, or tell me what you feel. So I wonder if you have any other insights, because I think people feel lost postpartum about, well, what am I supposed to do? But I think big message is, what do you want to do?
Yes. I love those questions that you shared so much, Mel. Another question that I will often ask is, what does your life plate look like right now?
Mhm.
Because those of us who have been through pregnancy and birth, we have our own personal experiences that no doubt, kind of create a little bit of bias for us. But we know that everyone's experience is very unique to them. Some women have colicky babies. Some are really struggling with getting sleep in. Some are struggling in the fueling department and adequately, nourishing their bodies. Maybe there's lactation in the mix. Maybe that is going well, and maybe it is not, and it's a giant stressor. So I think that, asking those questions and coming in from that standpoint of meeting the person where they're at, understanding what is important to them, what are their goals, where is their body at right now? So I love the idea of, asking questions like, how is that serving your body now? How is that serving you right now? And honoring our now. Because where we are right now often isn't where we were. It often isn't where we want to be. And we can look at those things, but at the end of the day, we need to consider, what capacity do I have right now from the standpoint of time, mental space, energy, motivation? What do we want to do? And, potentially exploring the whys behind exercise and creating space for many different experiences. Because there can be a lot of, shame and a lot of shoulds attached to our expectations of what pregnancy and postpartum experience and what exercise looks like within that, what it should be. And maybe what we think it should be isn't necessarily what's going to serve our now best.
Mhm.
Um, Sorry, I'm going on tangents.
No, I think of two people in the back of my head that I actually did online appointments with recently. One of them was 7 weeks postpartum after a C-section, and you could feel that she was just itching to do more. So I could tell, like when you mentioned like your life plate, she had time. She was ready to prioritize that, but she was feeling held back by messages around, don't lift more than your baby, be careful, right? And so she was really struggling with, she wanted to do more, but she was feeling paralyzed by those messages. Whereas I think of other people that like you mentioned, they're like, I don't have a moment. And so sometimes they're coming to you saying, I don't have a moment, but they're also saying, I have these symptoms that are on my radar. I am obsessing about them. I'm feeling this pressure and I can't get it out of my head. So maybe they have a moment when they're feeding to think about something, or maybe they notice when they're bending down to pick up their toddler is when they feel their symptom. And I always say, let's just make an exercise out of that movement. Let's think about that movement, because that's all you have time for right now. But how can we think about making that movement easier? And like you said, that's where maybe sometimes we need to break down the requirements of that task.
Totally.
And I actually always have Anthony, who knows where I heard this. This is not, though he's never just said this once, but train harder than life so life is easy.
Yeah.
And I think that always makes me think of, I use that with my clients all the time so that they can picture, what does your life require? Because everybody's life is different, and being able to find out how to help you feel equipped, or the capacity, like you said, to be able to do what you need to. And I think for a new mom, like you said, the demands are high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on, any other messages when it comes to like the postpartum mom, and maybe a lot of times when people want to know, where do I start? And I think we started with like, what do you like to do and where are you at now? Any other general messages? I know I'm leaving that very wide
Yeah.
open, but any other general messages? Because I know that's something people say, okay, great. You're asking me what I want to do. And you're saying that I need to honor where I am now. But beyond that, any suggestions for how someone might approach their recovery?
Right. So, from a clinician's viewpoint, I think that we always need to think about this being very individualized, and I like the term bespoke, right? Tailored to the individual. Recognizing that individuals are going to fall somewhere on what I like to call the risk tolerance spectrum. So we have some folks that are very fearful, very avoidant, that we might need to, be a bit more conservative with them, not necessarily because their physical fences are limited, in terms of what their body is physically capable of doing, but those psychological fences can also be a barrier that we need to gently walk through with them to help them build their confidence and help them to realize that maybe they are already quite strong and capable. And on the other end of the spectrum, we sometimes encounter those folks who, are potentially really pushing the limits of their physical capacity in a way that is not necessarily helpful for them right now. And so, kind of figuring out where that individual falls along the spectrum and kind of tailoring your approach and your conversations and your interventions to where that person is. And continually checking in with them. So, one of the things that I like to say is, if I ever give you too much, I want you to make sure that you share that with me. And on the flip side, if the things that we're working on, you're feeling like this is going awesome, I'm ready for more, bring that to me too. So really having kind of this shared decision making that is promoted and encouraged throughout the entire process. Because we need to make it work for them, right? And, things change. And the last thing that we need is shame, being attached to this process. So it's okay if we don't do our exercises every single day, right? It's okay if we allow this to kind of ebb and flow with life, because life is going to happen. Maybe we go through, like maybe COVID goes through your house, or a stomach bug goes through your house, or your partner is away working out of the house for a week. There are many different things that can come up, and we need to be flexible in our approach. Both if we're a clinician or a fitness professional working with one of these people, or if we're thinking about it from ourselves, that maybe we need to give ourselves a little bit of compassion and reflect on maybe we're doing the best that we can right now, and maybe that's okay. And I think I love what you were mentioning about how, if someone does have symptoms, well, maybe that first step is looking at what those daily tasks are, and can we potentially change how they're doing those tasks in order to make them feel better with them. And yeah, little movement snacks. So sometimes it's like we can't carve out 30 minutes a day to go through, an exercise sequence, even if that's what we want to do. So really championing the all or something approach rather than the all or nothing. And at the same time, there are some folks where the movement snack thing doesn't work well for them, and they really do better carving out, a chunk of time and, getting their partner or getting, someone to help provide some support watching the kids so that they can just disappear downstairs or disappear to the gym or, out on the trails or whatever their place is. So yeah, there's no right way, only what is working best for the individual right now.
I've started to offer these online postpartum recovery groups because I see the power um, in watching other people and learning from other people too. And I think one of the takeaways we always go through, a lot of the purpose of it is to educate, like what is diastasis and what is prolapse and what does go on with our body postpartum. And I really am targeting people in that first couple months postpartum because I'm really wanting to take away fear and help create comfort with early movement. And I think one thing that if you ask most people what they got out of it is they would get, I'm an individual, because then they can see, oh, look at Sarah is actually, I can tell she's ready to do more. Like I can hear from her language that she's in a different situation than I. And I today feel like I need to rest, but that's okay because so-and-so said that she needed to rest too. And I think that it's helped for people to see that it does ebb and flow and that they're not the same as everyone, but it also creates a bit of encouragement or helps people see like she's doing it and look how good she felt it, and so I've really found that those can be very helpful to help people navigate their own body.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's creating permission for it to look different for them, isn't it?
That's what I get a lot of times is in it's I almost feel uncomfortable, but when people say it gave me the permission to try things, like it's funny, I didn't give them permission. I didn't say you can do this, but they
Yeah.
felt more comfortable trying things and navigating their own body. I've really liked them.
And I think when it comes to permission, it's not that we're giving them permission, it's more we're allowing them to see that they can give themselves permission.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another population that I find is getting confusing messaging around strengthening is the pregnant population. And in another episode, I talked about what the evidence based guidelines are around exercise in pregnancy. But I do find that a lot of my clients are saying, no, I used to strength train,
Mhm.
or I don't know if it's okay. So I actually have just been avoiding and I'm only walking. Can you speak a little bit about the benefits of strength training in pregnancy?
Yeah, so the benefits of exercise in general during pregnancy are very well established at this point. I mean, the World Health Organization is continuing to recommend strength training twice a week. You can do more than that if that's benefiting you for our pregnant population. And in addition to that, 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise. Now, that doesn't mean, again, going back to that idea of this being individualized and bespoke. So that doesn't mean that everyone has to be there, right? If we start with someone who's very sedentary, maybe we have someone who's experiencing some really debilitating pregnancy-related pelvic girdle pain, and just walking and moving around the house right now is problematic for them. Let's get them to see pelvic physio and see if we can get a handle on that pelvic girdle pain and get them feeling better so that they can be more successful in exercising. But again, it's okay for it to look different for every person. But I do think that strength training is something that is well established to be safe during pregnancy for the vast majority, like I'd say 99% of pregnant people, unless someone has been advised by their care provider, like their OB, their gynae, that if they are on bed rest, obviously these are unique and different situations. And not to go against that, but for the vast majority of us, we know that strength training is beneficial both for the pregnant person and for that baby or babies for improving outcomes. And there are many, many different impacts of doing exercise. And I think that the incorporation of strength training is important throughout pregnancy because, guess what? When that baby comes out, there's carrying involved. Little ones grow rapidly, and packing around a 6-month-old is, or that becomes a toddler. My sister, she had kids a few years later than I did. And it always amazed me when I would, visit with her and her kids, and I would hold, one of her little ones for a while, and I'd be like, this is so tiring. I wasn't used to it anymore. But, you're lugging load around for a big chunk of your time, carrying car seats, carrying strollers, carrying diaper bags, being able to manage this. Sometimes we have more than one kid, right? And so maybe we're carrying our little one in a car seat and our diaper bag, and then we have a toddler that wants to take off down the road that we're also carrying and trying to wrangle. This requires a certain amount of capacity. And again, if we can build that capacity, if we can maintain, and in some cases even improve our strength as we progress through pregnancy, I think that that's going to help to set us up for a bit of an easier time in that postpartum period.
Absolutely. I saw it one time. I don't know if it was on Instagram or Facebook, but someone was, I don't remember who posted it, but they were poking fun at the message, like, don't lift anything after you have a baby. But it was showing a mom, she had a medicine ball wrapped up like a baby. And she, like, the number of times she lifted it from different positions, with rotation, with bending, with extending. I thought it was such a great depiction of, like, yes, we do lift heavy weights after. And I think it's also important to know, because I think some people will be listening to this thinking, like, I already canceled my gym membership, or I don't have the money to go to the gym. This is where I always ask people, we talk about the benefits of strength training, but then, like, what do you have bands at home? Do you have weights at home? Do you like classes? How could we get it in for you? Do you like a 30-minute workout? Do you like one exercise a day? Because again, it doesn't need to be the same for everybody. And you've talked about this several times. Like, it depends on the person. And where are you now? Meeting you at where you're now. What will you do? What do you find interesting?
For sure.
Yeah. Let's go even before pregnancy, and let's talk about, and some people don't have babies. So most of the people listening to this are women, and I think about, the very active population. I think about the people that love to run, that maybe their jam is just hiking. Well, and I think sometimes there's like, well, I don't want big muscles, or I don't want to bulk up. I'm looking to look a different way. Can you talk a little bit about how you talk about strength training with this population? What are the benefits?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Mel. And I think that for me, I really come from a foundation of always honoring autonomy. So we get to exercise in the ways that we want to exercise. And I don't force anyone to strength train if they don't want to strength train, because they're the boss of themselves, right? But I do have a role to play in sharing knowledge of why strength training can be beneficial for them. So as an example, I have ultra marathon athletes that I've worked with before that have found that they've had performance improvements when they've incorporated strength training. We also need to think about things like bone health as we progress through the lifespan. And that might be something that's not on our radar right now, but nonetheless, as we age, having that heavier loading is really important for our bone health, for staving off things like sarcopenia as we progress through our lifespan. And to your point about getting bulky, this, you have to put in a lot of very concerted effort for a long period of time to drive hypertrophy. It is not the situation where we just look at weights and poof, we have giant muscles. That just isn't a thing. I wish it was easier to drive hypertrophy, actually, because hypertrophy can actually be incredibly beneficial when we're looking at that capacity thing. So not to go on too much of a tangent, but if we think about changes to the abdominal wall that occur through pregnancy, where we may have some diastasis rectus abdominis, and we may have some changes in the laxity of the fascial sheaths that contain our rectus abdominis muscles, our lateral abdominal muscles, and hypertrophy can part of changing the aesthetics of the abdominal wall, if that's something that is important to that individual. Not to say that it needs to be or that it should be, but for many individuals, it is something that's meaningful and important to them. And thinking about from the pelvic floor standpoint as well, oftentimes we are wanting to create some hypertrophy of the pelvic floor muscles. So in cases where there has been potentially a pelvic floor birth injury, potentially there is a levator ana avulsion as an example, where those pelvic floor muscles have come away from the pelvic bone. There's research to show that over time, we can hypertrophy the remaining musculature to compensate for that deficit in structure. So we want to be driving hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is a good thing in many cases. But the idea that doing some strength training, particularly for strength training, 2 to 3 times a week, at the level of volume that is going to be common for most folks, we are not going to turn into bodybuilders that have giant muscles. That takes hours in the gym and consistent application of training stimulus in order to get that. Yeah, it's very difficult.
I often think of like movement and capacity almost like vocabulary, and that you just want to have, like, we all want the best vocabulary in speaking and reading, and same with movement and exercise. And that if it, sometimes maybe your vocabulary is just not wide enough, or you're repeating something over and over again, and you need to expand that a little bit. Because I think what you mentioned is that I picture the clients listening to this and thinking that if they're coming to see a physio, it's probably because something's not feeling good, or something's affecting their performance.
Yeah.
And right. And so the strength training can be a way to address a possible weakness, or a possible movement preference that they're repeating over and over again in their desired activity. But I agree. I think it's something that as soon as you explain it to people, they're like, okay, of course I'll do that. I don't want to stop running because I love running, but I don't want to be in so much pain, or I want to feel like I can do it longer, or what have you. And so I think as soon as we explain it to them, I find that they're very interested and thankful for the information.
Mm-hmm. And specificity does matter, right? So again, going back to what is our intention? What are our goals with respect to exercise? Sometimes it's just social connection. Sometimes it's mental health, just having an outlet, having some me time. Other times we're looking for true physical adaptations. So maybe we are wanting to get stronger. Well, if we want to get stronger, we need to challenge our strength. Bone health, lean tissue mass, right? So that whole idea of sarcopenia as we progress through the lifespan, that starts as early as 35 years of age. And if we want to hold on to that lean mass, well, then we need to be providing that stimulus to our body to say, hey, let's keep this. This is important. We actually need this. So, we can create space for exercise to look however it wants to look, but then we can also explore, well, what is it that you want exercise to achieve for you? And once we know what is it that they want, then we can provide some suggestions for them as to what type of exercise is going to provide the best stimulus for that particular adaptation that we're after.
Mm-hmm. If we think, because we've talked about people before they're pregnant, we've talked about pregnancy, we've talked about the early postpartum period. Another population I see a lot of is perimenopausal or menopausal women that, often come in, because I see so many pelvic health clients. They're coming in maybe referred from the urologist, gynecologist, or their friend or their daughter, because they're having bladder urgency, leaking, prolapse, different aches and pains in their pelvis. And we obviously talk about the pelvic floor, but then I also move outside the pelvic floor and talk about just how they're doing some of their day-to-day gardening, or what exercises do you do? Do you golf? Do you walk your dog? And it's, again, something that comes up quite often is like, what are you doing for your overall strength? Because this isn't just the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor could be the victim here. Will you talk a little bit about the benefits and, with this special population around perimenopause and menopause of strength training?
Yeah. Well, I think what we're seeing is that a lot of the folks that are currently in the space, in particular of postmenopause, they grew up in a different time, even than what you and I did, Mel. So if we think to our mothers, our grandmothers, many of these people grew up in a time where you exercised to get skinny. You didn't think about lifting weights. Like, that wasn't something that was socially very accepted and certainly not celebrated in the way that we're seeing now. And so for many of these individuals, the idea of strength training is quite foreign to them, and isn't something that they have necessarily ever done before. So that can be a bit of a barrier. And then I think we also have barriers around, you know, narratives where strength training is harmful to the pelvic floor, where someone may have some osteopenia or osteoporosis, and they have very real concerns about hurting their bones, fracturing something if they strength train, even though the research is very clear in telling us that loading the bones is the stimulus that talks best to our bones. And again, kind of going back to our earlier conversation about that interconnection between the tension and intra-abdominal pressure that we need to generate and how that can be influenced by the strength that we have. We need to be getting this population strength training, if they're open to it. And we can be having those conversations to share why this is important and how this is going to be beneficial, so that they're not avoiding it because they're fearful that they're going to hurt themselves. And then also guiding them, so that they can build that confidence and build that physical capacity, so that they can get better at that. And we know that exercise is so important in this time period as well. So with, changes in hormones, there's often changes in our gut health, right? So we may be experiencing constipation. Well, movement and exercise is one of the biggest things that can really be beneficial for that. And that might be something, again, that's not even on their radar. Like, what? Like, this is going to help me with, my bowels. Yes, it is. Also hot flashes. So we have research to show that strength training is something that can reduce the intensity and the frequency of hot flashes. Again, something that may not be their primary motivator for why they might want to strength train, but is nonetheless a great side effect, so to speak. And yeah, like the lean mass, bone health. We know that for the World Health Organization's recommendations, once you are 65 and up, the recommendation actually changes. And it's not to say that as we're older, we should be strength training less. It's that we should be strength training more. So whereas for those under 65, the World Health Organization recommends 2 or more times per week of full body strength training. Once we're over 65, including those people that have chronic conditions and that may be living with disabilities, the recommendation is now 3 or more times per week of strength training. And strength training in this population also helps with things like gait and balance. Now, again, depending upon who you are, that may not be something that is important to you, but it is something for us to be aware of. I also think about how it can change how we see ourselves as we age, right? And that can have these ripple effects into how we show up in life. So really, coming at it from that standpoint of what do you want your life to look like, right? Do you want to be that grandparent that, can, without a second thought, pick up your toddler grandchild? You want to be able to, hike up the mountain with your adult children. You want to be able to help your grandkid move into college. You want to be able to have fun with your spouse and go travel the world. Who knows what that looks like for you as a person, but what does it look like? What do you want your golden years to be like? And that doesn't happen overnight, right? That happens right now with the choices that we're making right now.
And I think, you bring up a lot of things, and I all of a sudden I had a client the other day, mid-60s, that came in. Symptoms of prolapse and leaking is what brought her in. I think she was gynecology referred, but I helped her understand the pelvic floor and pressure management, and had her do a few things in the room, lift a cart, cough, feel how she could influence kind of the pressure management. And her eyes kind of opened, and she said, I was just told by my gynecologist to just take it easy. So I've actually been getting my husband to lift all the groceries. And she goes to Pilates regularly. So I was able to tie in that Pilates, which is meaningful to her, and get her to do a few things that she does at Pilates and use that pressure management to feel, okay, I actually have control of what's going on down there. But then
Mhm.
I said, what would happen if you did, because now that you feel that you have a strategy that doesn't make you feel so heavy, what if you lifted the groceries? And she's
Mm.
like, well, but the doctor told me not to. And I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate, but what if your husband hurts his back? And
Yes.
who's going to lift the groceries? And she was kind of like, yeah. And I said, what if you start with 2 bags, one on each side? Use what you just showed me when you lifted this cart, which is heavier than your groceries, I bet.
Mhm.
And you could see that she was just kind of, oh my gosh, this is related to the strengthening I do at Pilates.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes just being able to tie in, because she liked the idea of going to Pilates. I don't think it was necessarily to build strength, but being able to tie in that your strength is actually required in your day. And if you just stop lifting groceries and then stop lifting your laundry, then who, and your husband hurts himself, who's left, you know?
Yeah, it's such an amazing point, Mel, that it's not just what we want to be able to do, but what do we need to be
Have
able
to
to
do.
do?
Mhm.
It brings to mind a client of mine that I had that very similar experience, came from no doubt a very well-intentioned physician that told her not to be lifting more than 10 to 20 pounds. And this was an individual who was caring for a spouse who had significant health issues, and she was the person that was taking care of him. What does that statement of don't lift 10 to 20 over 10 to 20 pounds mean to her when she is the caregiver for her spouse? She needs to help him with transfer. She needs to help him with, bathing, taking care of him. And she's also the person that's responsible for keeping up their house and their yard, as well as being someone who, up until that point, is very active, who likes to exercise. That is her jam. So I was very grateful that she ended up in my clinic and that we were able to explore that and have some conversations. But it makes me wonder, what about those people who don't know about pelvic physio, who don't find their way to a clinician who is supportive in understanding the context, but also in helping them to find ways to help their body meet the demands of the things that they want and need to be able to do.
Well, and if we move a little bit ahead in the lifespan, you've touched on seniors, and balance is a big thing. And I hear all the time, maybe they come in again, usually they're coming in for a pelvic health related issue, but as you start to look at their whole life, I used to go to the gym, but now because of COVID, or we used to get out for walks with the dog. And then as you probe, it usually comes down to balance. And I don't want to use a walker or what have you, but I saw this beautiful video that one of our colleagues, Brittany Klingman, posted, an older gentleman that she was getting him to get up and off the ground, up into standing, reach, I think it was like a kettlebell or something like that, reach it up onto a higher surface. And I was like, amazing. You could just see the pride on
Yeah.
his face, but just being able to make that meaningful for people. Oh, you're having a hard time getting off the ground, or, oh, you'd like to go back out walking with your dog. Your dog pulls, doesn't it? And you feel like maybe you lose your balance and you have to get up and off the curb. But just trying to spin it to not let's lift weights at the gym to
Yeah.
let's help you feel stronger so that you feel more confident in your balance when you have to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, or in case you're having some more falls. I had a person the other day with Parkinson's. He said, I'm starting to fall more.
Yeah.
He happened to be leaking, I think, because his balance is off. But, I think this is an important population too, that isn't used to going to the gym, but
Mhm.
that could really buy into some strength training to have a better quality of life.
Totally agree.
So I think if people are listening, I mean, whether you have a family member or you yourself or someone that is noticing, some of your day-to-day tasks are harder, I think thinking that if you can find someone to work with you to be able to help you come up with some ideas that will help facilitate that. Do you offer online appointments?
I do.
You do. Yeah.
Mhm.
And sometimes barriers can be that I don't have someone I trust in my community, or I find it hard to get out because my balance is off. Sometimes I find that online appointments can serve this population well too, just because you can give them some movements to try without laying your hands on them.
Yeah. And I think also recognizing, and I think you touched upon this a little bit already, Mel, but recognizing that it doesn't have to look like going to the gym. It doesn't have to look like working with a trainer or lifting dumbbells or barbells, or it can certainly look like that. But it can also very much look like exercise in the comfort of someone's home, using household objects, using body weight exercise. So strength training is really relative to the individual. And there are many ways that we can, match up what that looks like, to make sure that it is something that meets the needs of that individual.
So I think if we were to summarize a little bit some of the things we talked about today, if we put the listeners into two camps of people, one camp is the people that are clients. Another camp is people that are healthcare practitioners. Do you have any final messages for clients that are listening to this, just as it comes to the messages that we've provided today?
Definitely. So for clients, people who are listening right now who may be experiencing pain, they may be experiencing pelvic symptoms, or they may be having issues with just being able to do the things that they want to do in their life, get started, right? So it doesn't matter where your point is right now. You can take that next step. You can start, you can reach out to someone, or you can just start on your own. And get moving, find ways that work for you. It doesn't have to look a certain way. Take that should word and throw it out, and allow it to meet what it needs to look like for you. It doesn't have to look like how it does for, your neighbor, your friend. Anything is better than nothing. Just get started. And for the clinicians and fitness professionals that are working with these individuals, I would say it's always important for us to check in with our own biases, to make sure that we are not projecting fear onto the people that we're working with, that we need to challenge ourselves to get super comfortable in assessing and recognizing where the individual is at, and being able to appropriately dose and match the exercise that we're recommending for that individual. But that it can be done, and it is the most rewarding thing in the world when we can do that.
Will you, for the people that are listening that want to know more about the amazing courses that you offer, any that are coming up or that you want to make sure people know about? And I know that there's more than one, so maybe I will make sure that in the show notes it includes any relevant links. Anything that's coming up though that you want people to know about?
Sure. Yeah. So I've got a few different things that are coming up. The first one is coming up at the end of October, October 29th and 30th. I have a live online course hosted with Pelvic Health Solutions. It's called Beyond the Pelvis, exercise for the whole body and the everyday person. So this course is really about how do we scale and modify exercise down to that individual who may be sedentary, where exercise may be something that is new and novel to them. And how can we scale that all the way up to the more elite athletes that we may be working with? And for those pelvic health professionals in particular who are very brilliant at working within the pelvis, but who might feel a little bit uncertain as to how do I apply this full body approach, and how do I get my pelvic health folks off the treatment bed and get them moving and get them strengthening in a way that is actually very supportive of whatever their concerns are, whether that's diastasis, incontinence, prolapse, or pain that they might be experiencing. So that's the first course that I have. I will also be presenting alongside Terry Robertson Elder and Anthony Lowe at CSM in February. So we have a presentation that's on prolapse. So I'm really excited about that. So if any physios are listening in and they're going to be at CSM in San Diego in February, connect with me. I always love to connect with other individuals who are passionate about helping folks with pelvic health concerns. And then my TIPS FC course is coming back in the spring. So I have a live 2-day masterclass. It's going to be hosted in Liverpool in the United Kingdom in April. And then for folks who aren't in UK or aren't wanting to travel there, I also have a live online Tips FC that is going to be, it's not like the live in-person masterclass, but it's a fabulous option, and that's going to be hosted with Reframe Rehab, and that one's going to be in May. So that's kind of what's on the agenda for the next little bit here, Mel.
Listen, I thank you so much on behalf of everybody listening, just for all the time and energy you put into, because I know, I know how much of this leads to sleepless nights and volunteer time, because you're so passionate about the information that you know, and that you know how much it helps other people. So I really do thank you, like for everything that you do, not only for our profession, but people.
Thanks, Mel. Right back at you. I think your podcast is brilliant. And you can tell that it's that heart-centered passion project. So thank you for all of your time and energy that you put into creating this for everyone.
Awesome.